God, people are getting shot, dude.
Get out of here.
Oh my God, dude.
This guy's firing off shots.
Working hum of a Maytag home. Maytag, what's inside matters.
The shooter targeted a nightclub where people came together to be with friends, to dance and to sing and to live. The place where they were attacked is more than a nightclub. It is a place of solidarity and empowerment where people have come together to raise awareness, to speak their minds, and to advocate for their civil rights. So this is a sobering reminder that attacks on any American, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation, is an attack on all of us and on the fundamental values of equality and dignity that define us as a country. And no act of hate or terror will ever change who we are or the values that make us Americans.
Muslim from Port St. Lucie, Florida, who had previously worked as a security guard. He was an American citizen, born to Afghan parents. He's from New York. We're getting more information. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has been learning more about Mateen. Joining us now. Catherine, what can you tell us?
Well, thank you, Brett. Within the last hour, I've had a series of conversations which have really reinforced a handful of points. One is that Mateen was known to the FBI as recently as 2013, and that a file or folder, if you will, was open on him. This is where the information seems to diverge. One of our contacts told us that the file was open because of his contacts with extremists. The other was that it was unrelated to terrorism, but the bottom line is that this was an individual who was known to the FBI. Second, what was really reinforced to us is that this is being investigated as an act of terrorism, but more specifically, one that was inspired by a foreign terrorist organization. There's what's called a social media scrub going on with his profiles on the web. I was told that he had a MySpace page and a Facebook page. Both of them are now down, which is typical in these situations. But not a lot jumped out at those sites about him having radical ties.
So like we saw in the early stages of San Bernardino, where eventually they got to inspired by ISIS.
Correct.
It seems like this was perhaps more cut and dry at the beginning.
They've moved to the inspired by a foreign terrorist group much more quickly than we've seen in previous cases. That says to me it's driven by data, most likely social media data or some kind of phone communication that he was having. As you opened your show, we just heard from Adam Schiff, who's someone who has been briefed already on the Intelligence Committee, who said that he had pledged allegiance to ISIS. I would tell you, based on one of our counterterrorism contacts who tracks ISIS and al-Qaeda social media, that within an hour of the siege taking place, that a very senior al-Qaeda account on Telegram began rejoicing in the siege. The timing was a little unusual because this, I don't want to say shows foreknowledge, but it was very close to the inception of the attack. And then the ISIS leadership accounts began taking over the hashtags for the Pulse, which is another thing that we see, though not a claim of responsibility. But
Hashtag for the Pulse, the nightclub.
That's correct.
The site
But your point is very well taken, because they've moved to inspired by a foreign terrorist organization very quickly, and in my experience, that tells you that it is data-driven.
Quickly, there also was a web threat by ISIS, tied
That's
to
correct.
ISIS, specifically mentioning Florida just 3 days ago. And some of these things just, you know, they go off and they make threats and nobody pays attention to them, but when something happens in a state where they mention, maybe they go back and look at it.
Right. I'd be a little cautious on that at this point, because there's been almost like a sort of rolling series of threats from ISIS targeting ordinary Americans. They began with the military, then they moved to intelligence and government officials, and in the last 6 months they've really moved to ordinary Americans. It's a little tempting to look at that kill list, and yeah, I wouldn't make that at this point.
Okay, we'll follow it. We'll head back for breaking details. Catherine, as always, thank you.
You're welcome.
You almost got hit by a bus, and you've never been to a nude beach. But since you're alive,
was, like I said, after about 2 o'clock, and we usually start winding it down, and all of a sudden I heard something that sounded like firecrackers. So I thought maybe somebody was playing a joke and lit off some firecrackers, and then I kind of lowered the music, stopped for a second, then it went again. So then at that point I kind of hid behind the little DJ booth that I have, and then it started going rap like real fast. Like it was constant, blah 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 blah. And then at that point I just kind of hid behind the DJ booth, and then everybody.
We just learned some more about this suspect, 29-year-old Omar Siddiqui Mateen, including the interviews he actually had with the FBI in connection with investigations. Apparently, he had made some sympathetic comments about ISIS that generated the initial interviews. He was interviewed, but they found no conclusive evidence. They said it was inconclusive as to any specific solidarity or sympathy, support, involvement with ISIS. They did tell us, though, that on this 911 call that he made into this terror operation, he did express his support for, quote, the leader of the Islamic State. Peter Bergen, he also mentioned specifically the case of Manar Abu Salah back in 2014, an American who went to Syria for ISIS.
Well, this is fascinating that the FBI would be investigating Mateen for his connections to Manar Abu Salah. Manar Abu Salah was recruited by al-Qaeda in Syria, the local group there. It's known as the Nusra Front. He traveled from Florida to Syria, got training, then came back to Florida, unbeknownst to the FBI until later, met with a number of people, and then went back to Syria again to conduct a suicide operation for al-Qaeda. So the fact that this guy, Mateen, seemed to have been in the social circle of Manar Abu Salah, who's also a Floridian, who was recruited by al-Qaeda, I think is quite significant.